Welcome to Season 3 of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we speak with an Israeli tour guide, mother, and wife of a soldier fighting in the recent conflict. We speak about her life since October 7th, what is happening now in Israel, and her experience visiting the site of the attacks in the south. Let's get started. Welcome to the podcast. So the first thing I wanted to ask, just to give us a little bit of information about who you are, your background, what you do, and all that amazing stuff.
So my name is Hadara Arbel. I was born in Columbus, Ohio. My family made Aliyah when I was 7 years old, so I might sound from North America, but I am Israeli through and through. And that means that not only did I go through elementary school, high school, military service, reserve duty, university, got married here, raised children here, have mortgages here in Israel. But it's the way that I see the world is through the lens of an Israeli. And who I am on a more personal or identity level is I would identify as a proud Israeli. It's very hard to introduce myself because before October 7th is very different than introducing myself after October 7th. So I would introduce myself before October 7th saying, I was born in Columbus, Ohio. I'm an Israeli through and through, just like I did beforehand. I've been a tour educator and tour guide with many groups from all around the world, including Canada. So my favorite participants in groups. For the last 18 years, I believe in Israel education, through informal education, through getting to know the country and its history through your feet and through your own eyes and not through propaganda that you might be fed all over different platforms. And that's really my first marriage, and I'm very dedicated to it. And the second one is to my beautiful husband, Noam, and together we have 4 children. We're raising them together in Tel Aviv. So that's how I would introduce myself before October 7th. After October 7th, I would say I'm a very scared Israeli. I'm a very proud Jew, and I don't know what lies ahead of me in my future. But I do know that I am where I need to be at this moment in time in history, and it is a very serious moment in our history.
That's amazing. So obviously being in Israel for many, many, many years, you've dealt with terrorism, unfortunately, and wars and conflicts. What was different with October 7th that was so... How did Israel change fundamentally as a country following the 7th versus any of the other conflicts that we've had?
I would go back to the Intifada. I was in Jerusalem. I was in my teenage years at the time. Those were 4 years of the heavy bus bombings and suicide attacks. 60% of the attacks were in Jerusalem over the 4 years of the Second Intifada. Thousands were killed. And like I mentioned, 60% of the attacks were in Jerusalem alone. I witnessed one. I almost missed another one, and that was our daily reality. I remember if my brother and I would take the same bus, want to go somewhere, we would go to the bus station together, and then we would debate who would get on the first bus and show up to school or wherever on time, and who would go on the next bus, because we didn't want to be on the same bus together, even if we were going to the same place and needed to be there at the same time, because we didn't want one of the buses to be bombed and us to be there together and have my parents lose 2 of their children. So those were the dilemmas of the Intifada. But I would say that it's totally different, first of all, on a national level, as well as on a personal level. So I'll start with the personal level. I'm a mother. I'm not a teenager, which means, I'm not like, I don't have this fast impulses and doing stupid stuff. I understand the risks. I raise children, and you give, like any mother around the world, you invest your life into raising children, and now knowing that with a blink of an eye, that could be gone, that could be taken from you, right? And not only can they be taken from you, as we're seeing, like we're really seeing it, but I could be taken from them, right? And what's worse, like, it's horrible. These are choiceless choices. that aren't up to us anyhow. So the terror is the same level of terror. My experience of it is different. Also, on a national level, I would say two things. First of all, during the Intifada, it was a 4-year stretch. It wasn't one big, massive attack on October 7th. So we kind of got used to it. And oddly enough, you learn how to cope with this new reality, and you learn how to live in the shadow of terror. So we had all these tricks and games that made us feel more confident, that made us feel like we were fighting the terror and maybe we were even winning. But here, I feel like it was so strong and it was so hard on October 7th, and it only really hit the tip of the iceberg. I mean, 1,200 people plus who were killed just in one day is like enormous, right? We can't even... I haven't even grasped the scope of it. And yet, it could have been a lot worse, right? So, but even that, like, it was so large, and we haven't realized where it came from. I mean, now we know, but it was just so shocking, and we couldn't believe it, that it could happen to us. And maybe that was our mistake in all of this, right? The hubris of thinking that we were untouchable, that we had, the best security forces in the world, that we were observing our enemy's steps from every move possible, from the air, ground, and from cyber. But obviously we were wrong. And now we're only starting to deal with how to fight the last war that happened. So how do we make sure that another October 7th doesn't happen? But it already happened, and our enemies are planning the next one, and we're playing cat and mouse. Mm-hmm. And on a national level, it created a loss of trust in not only the government, which was broken also beforehand, as I'm sure you're familiar with the judicial reform and all of the social mayhem that was going on in the streets beforehand, but on a security level, like with all the chaos that was going on between the three branches of the government, etc., there was one institution that was holier than thou for Israelis across the board, and that was the IDF. And there's no better way to say, I don't know if I can say this online, but they fucked up. Like, they really messed up. Okay?
For sure.
And how do we gain our trust back in an institution that's whole purpose is to protect its citizens when they failed us in the worst way possible? The people who saved Israel on October 7th were private citizens, those who took the hardest hit and prevented in their lives and in their sacrifice an attack that could have stretched much further and been a lot worse, that could have reached my home in Tel Aviv within 40 minutes alone. And if the terrorists wouldn't have went through the 3,000, 4,000 people that were in the rave in Re'im, in the Nova rave, or gone through kibbutz along the way, they were our buffer, and they saved us in their lives. So they saved us, private citizens, and the police. The police showed itself to be very successful in the time of need, but the military failed in all branches. Of course, there are heroic stories, but unfortunately, those are minority. Those are less than the rest. We lost trust in our military, and our challenge now is rebuilding it, but rebuilding it during a war that's still ongoing, and therefore all of the leadership in the military, as well as the government, hasn't changed. Because they're saying you can't change your military, you can't change leadership during wartime. So how do you regain trust of the people that broke it during the hardest time possible? So that's where we are nationally, and that's how it's different than the Intifada.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a conundrum. Obviously, they haven't even sorted out, I guess, what fully went wrong and who's to blame and what to do better next time, because they're busy trying to fight off what's going on currently, which is definitely a challenge. So one question I kind of have is, as a mother, as an Israeli, as a regular person in society now, how has life changed for you now that, for example, your husband is off fighting in various ways? You obviously can't speak for the whole country, but generally speaking, everybody's probably missing someone who's now putting their life on the line. Things aren't being done that used to be done. You're now a single mother trying to take care of kids. explain for people who are listening the challenge that causes, that people don't understand. When you send your family to war to defend yourself, it's not just like, oh, they go off to war, no big deal. The people at home are paying a huge price for this with having to pick up the slack.
Yeah, the home front today is stretched super thin. Unlike in previous wars or intifadas or anything, Israel called up 100% of the reserves, right? They call up, if they want 50% of the reserves, they call up 80%. If they want 80%, they call up 100%. They called up 100%, and 150% started showing up.
Wow.
Right? That says a lot about our people.
For sure.
And not only, so now we have so many people, and everyone is needed. It's not that they're not. They were all taken in as volunteers in addition to the reservists. And so now there's not enough food and there's not enough equipment, right? So people are now starting to cook for them and send it out. And we're all doing this, right? And now people are missing their jobs. So their coworker is doing their job and also their colleague's job who was called up in reserve, right? And again, and of course, all while being a single parent as well, all while under fire.
Yeah, we forget about that sometimes.
That's my story. Plus, small businesses are being hit and the economy is suffering. So I own a small tourism business, which of course came to a standstill in October 7th. We're starting to see small groups of show of solidarity, which has really been heartwarming and starting to trickle in a little of our income, but nothing in comparison to what we estimated for this season. And that's going to be a huge blow for me personally. So come to Israel, hire me as your tour guide. And
I can vouch for her. She's the best tour guide.
But my husband was called up on the first day of the war, like many others. 3% of our society is serving now in reserves. That's 3% of our whole society. So obviously it's an even larger group of men, mainly, but also women in between the ages of 21 when they're released from the service until 40, 45, until they're released from their reserve duty. So on one hand, like Tel Aviv, the coffee shops are open. And even on New Year's Eve, I heard parties going on outside the window. But when the clock hit 12, rockets started being launched towards Tel Aviv and towards the center area. So everyone stopped dancing for 7 minutes and then they went back to dancing. So on one hand, like life is kind of normal for most people. But for other people, myself included, it's not. So it's kind of like working in this twilight zone. My husband was not only called up, but he was the anchor parent of our family, of our 4 children. I went off to work, and he was like the CEO of our family, right? He managed everything. He knew where everyone went and all different times. He was in every single WhatsApp group of the children's, social circles, and in a blink of an eye, that disappeared, right? We were also traveling in Thailand for 3 months when all this happened. So, and it's his birthday. October 7th is my husband's birthday.
No way.
He came back from zip lining. Thailand is 4 hours ahead of Israel. So I already had all the news coming in when I was waiting back in the hotel with our 2 smaller children. And he came back with a smile from ear to ear. And I let him have it for a few more minutes. I asked him to share how it was. It looked amazing. It sounds great. And then I said, okay, I understand you didn't open up your phone and read news. He said, was it bad? I said, yes. He says, it's Israel. I said, yes. Yes, if we're going home. I said, open up your phone. And at that point, he realized that he was being called up for reserves.
I just want to point out for a sec how crazy that is, that literally with no words, because of the country that you're in and the history you guys have, that all you had to say was, there's bad news. And he kind of already knew. Is it Israel? Yes. Am I going home? Yes. Like, not even words. Like, it's just so, if you do that to someone in North America and you say, oh, I have bad news, they're never going to think, is it my country? Do I have to go home? Do I have to go to war? It's just such a crazy thing that you guys without words could just knew.
Yeah. That's interesting. I never thought of it. You're absolutely right. It's very profound. So we scrambled to get our way to Bangkok. We didn't know in the first week of the war if we would have a country to return to. If we returned, if we needed to flee, if we could have a flight to flee on, because airline companies were stopping to fly to Israel. So I very quickly was able to arrange through connections for an El Al pilot who was flying to Bangkok to carry mine and my children's American passports, as we're dual citizens, in case we couldn't make it back home. And he, even though he was called up by law, when you're abroad, you don't need to show up, but it wasn't a question. And he didn't even need to be called up. He would have been there anyhow. He served in 3 wars prior, twice in Gaza, once in Lebanon. He's not 40 years old. This is his 4th war. And he knows that he is needed. As he said, I'm trained and experienced in one position. If I don't show up now, who am I? And that was very soul shocking for me. Yeah. Who are we as a people? Who are we raising? For better and for worse. So he got back to Israel. He made it back on the first El Al flight that flew on Saturday. It was a plane that was chartered to only fly reservists back. Now get this, people left paradise, get on a plane, even though they didn't have to, and run to save their country. And it's beautiful. Yeah.
Honestly, to see those flights that were going from all over the world and people chartering flights to take people back was just mind blowing. The amount of people who felt the need to go back. But on a personal level, and I hope this isn't too difficult of a question, obviously, when you were younger, and the two of you probably served, at a younger age, life is different now. And I've known you for a little while now, to see you and your husband, who I think it's safe to say are the most amazing couple I've probably met. To have your husband go off and put himself on the line, how does that feel? It must be tough as the father of your children, your love of your life. Yeah. It must be tough. Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, I love him for wanting to do that and for needing to do that. And at the same time, how can you do this? How can you return? You have a job now. You need to be here with our 4 children. You can't just disappear, and you can't risk yourself, and I don't want to split up the family. But the values and knowing that he wouldn't be able to look himself in the mirror, and my love for him and passion for that overcame that. And I'm grateful that I was able to overcome that. A lot of wives or partners couldn't. And I totally get that. No criticism. I totally understand that. It was hard. It was really hard. Yeah, it's very different when you grow up and you've got kids now. How are you doing? We're great. Don't worry. We support you 100%. But inside, I was broken and torn. Yeah. Not only just physically, flying alone with 4 children across, from Thailand all the way to Tel Aviv. And then 5 days later, and then spending 5 nights here with rockets launched here. Now, as I mentioned, I have 4 children, and they're small. I have a 10-month-old at the time. I have a 4-year-old, and I have an 8 and a 10-year-old. So any rocket that goes off, and I have to now pick up all 4. If they're sleeping, I got to physically pick them up from bed and bring them down into a bomb shelter. Now, you can't do that when you're alone. For sure. So I would throw shoes on my 10-year-old to wake him up, and I'd pick up the baby, and I'd go out to the stairwell and yell to my neighbors who are on their way down, take the baby. And just give my children to random strangers on the way down to the bomb shelter, who later became friends and neighbors. And now we have a whole routine where they just stop through our apartment and pick up a child on the way. Wow. So sad to think about that, but it's amazing. Yeah, but it's really hard. It's really hard. Yeah. And the home front is stretched super thin. And this is a long war. Yeah. And every day is super challenging, and I don't know how long our home front can handle this. I don't know. And how can we across the globe, aside from, I know you've been working on donations for soldiers who are not having the right clothing for winter and equipment that they need because you said they were so stretched for equipment. How can we help the home front if we can't physically make it and volunteer right now, although there are opportunities? what is the best thing that will help you guys on the ground?
So I think in two ways. The first way is recognition. Soldiers get a lot of recognitions. There's some type of heroic romance around soldiers, especially in a war like this, which is really good versus evil, black and white. Like, it's never been so clear, at least from our standpoint, of course. I'm speaking from an Israeli perspective. Soldiers get a lot of respect here. The home front soldiers, the partners who are holding down the fort to ensure, fighting every day to ensure that there's a home to return to, don't get any of that. They don't get any of the bonuses, the gratification, the thank you for your service, anything. And everyone is really suffering here and mourning that it's hard to take on more. So if you're coming from abroad, take on a little bit of that. Recognize the home front. Whether it's just like sending messages saying, I see you. I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you. What can I do? And then if you want to actually send physical support, that's also great. There's initiatives. I got two pizza pies sent to my family. It saved me when all of my in-laws, God bless them, I love them all, showed up for Hanukkah. We had a great evening, but I was like, now I need to feed all these people. Okay, great. I just got a coupon for beef of a reservist, and we ordered 2 pizzas. So it actually makes a big difference. Send food and send your support.
That's amazing. Honestly, I think that you're right, that there's not enough people thinking about what goes on behind the scenes. We all think about what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in the north. We don't really think about the people who are, like you said, holding down the fort and making it possible. And I remember one thing you had said a while ago when it first started, that your husband felt like he couldn't fully fight unless he knew you guys were taken care of and you guys were safe. And I guess we also don't think about that as the person who's going to fight and has to put their life on the line. They need to know that the people at home are safe, because that's really what they're fighting for. And if you guys don't have the support at home and your kids and running from rockets, they can't help you from there. And I didn't really think about that until you had said, he didn't want to fight if he didn't know you guys were safe and taken care of and whatever. And it was so mind-blowing to me to think of that, is how do you fight an enemy with your mind on your family at home who you're really fighting for?
Yeah.
It's very, very tough. And I applaud you. I applaud anybody who does this. Thank
you. And we get support. It's harder to get the support here. I'll give you an anecdote. So I was about a week alone with the 4 kids in Bangkok after my husband flew back to Israel. And I immediately contacted the group of, there's Israeli women expat Facebook WhatsApp forum in Bangkok. And so I reached out. I explained our situation. It didn't take more than a sentence to say, husband's in reserve, here alone in Bangkok with 4 kids. And within moments, I had around the clock help.
Wow.
People, total strangers, showed up to babysit the kids so that I could take an hour to go into the bedroom and cry and then come back out with a smile. They said, they walked in, we don't really have experience with kids, but we're happy to help. I said, great. They just need a smiling face because, how much can they see mom cry? And dad worried. So they were babysitting. They were showing up with food, with games, with toys, with activities for the kids. And when when my husband called and said, how are you doing? I said, great. We're really okay. He's like, really? I said, yes, we're really okay. The community is taking care of us. He said, what community? I said, you'll be surprised. Wherever we go, there's a community of Jews. There's a community. There's expats, Israelis, and there's a community of Jews.
Wow, that's such an amazing story. Honestly, it's heartwarming to hear how we all come together.
To get used to being the one receiving help.
Oh, interesting. It's not something you're used to.
Oh, but that's, for my ego and in my sessions with the psychologist.
The next very difficult topic. I know you went down south, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Why you went, what you saw. I know it's not easy, and we see stuff on social media and whatever. Obviously, it could never do justice to what you probably saw down there. And so when I say down south, I mean you went to the site of the October 7th attack. So what made you want to go there or need to go there? What are you willing to share about the feelings maybe you had while you were down there, things like that?
My feelings, it's kind of anticlimactic perhaps because it's so fresh and raw. I haven't been able to process anything. So I found myself there in a complete disconnect emotionally. I'm sure it's there, and I'm sure it will settle in months or years from now. But it's just too overwhelming and too fresh and too raw. And there's too much that needs to be done now. I need to function. I can't break down.
Wow.
So I didn't. But I needed to go down for two reasons. I needed to go down and hug the people. I have friends there. And I needed to go and hug them. And I also needed to go down because I think there's nothing more powerful than seeing it with your own eyes. And it's not just bearing witness, which is a term that's often used for stuff that happened in the past, for Holocaust education. But this is real. It's happening now. It's being denied already while it's happening now. And you need to show up. Like, you just need to show up. I didn't see any other choice. This hopefully is the worst thing that we're ever going to go through in our lives. And we can't just close our eyes and bury our head in the sand. So I had to show up. I had to see it, feel it as much as I could allow myself emotionally at the time. And I need to be able to tell myself that I was there. But more so on a professional level, like, I really believe that there's nothing more powerful than personally witnessing as close possible to the experience that you can. And therefore I continue to lead groups. I've been there 3 times already. I'm going to be going there another 3 times this month. And I'll continue to show what's there as long as people want to show up.
Wow. That's very impressive. Like, honestly, it takes a little special kind of person who can go there, witness, and then teach and then show, what happened there. And it kind of leads me to my next question. You and I had met on a trip to Europe about the Holocaust. And so we obviously often speak about whether we should be teaching about the Holocaust. Should we be using these camps as educational centers, or is that inappropriate? It's a place where people died. And, do we feel any different about going south, like having trips and tours going south? Obviously, it's incredibly important, but it's so fresh and it's so different than the Holocaust, where it was years ago. It's almost like a whole lifetime ago. Did you feel any of the similar or different feelings about being in a Holocaust site versus that site?
Yes and no. The trip that I led to Poland with you was the last one that I made to Poland because I just couldn't anymore.
Wow.
Emotionally, I couldn't bear it. And October 7th, slapped us all in the face. And I just didn't really have I didn't have a choice. I did have a choice, but I didn't really have a choice. And it's so much harder than Poland, which I didn't allow myself, because in Poland, like you said, it was a long time ago. It was back in the history books. It wasn't so visual because there wasn't the technology at the time. Hamas fucking GoPro'd everything and then published it on social media as the most documented genocidal act ever in history, right? And not only is it not in history, October 7th, but it's not getting on a plane and going through customs to a different country far, far away. It's my home. It's literally like a 50-minute drive, straight drive from here to Gaza. I'm in Tel Aviv, right? Not even in the Gaza envelope area, in the center of the country. So that's really hard. And I still think that it's more important than ever. Because, let's learn from history. It took the world how long to start denying the Holocaust? Artifacts are important. Visuals are important. Archaeological excavations that are happening in the camps are important to deny. I mean, there's always the crazy fanatics, extremists that are going to deny it and say conspiracy theories and stuff like that over anything. But I'm talking about the normal people. I'm even talking about Jewish people in the younger generation. I'll never forget when I was guiding Birthright, and I had a group of, I believe they were from North America. I don't remember if they were Canadian or not. And I asked them in a program preparing themselves for the visit to Yad Vashem the following morning, I opened up with a question. I asked, what does the number 6 million mean to you? And I got blank stares across 50 young North American Jews.
Wow.
What is 6 million? Like, that was it. Like, what is 6 million? They had no clue. No clue. So I think that informal education is the most powerful tool of education, and being there yourself and witnessing it and seeing it and feeling it, smelling. I mean, you can really smell the burning still. Is something that I know has been embedded in my body and memory forever. And I don't know yet what effect it will have on my soul.
I think, like you said, it's the only way to stop misinformation is to actually see it yourself. It's actually a shame, like you said, that within honestly like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of the GoPro footage coming out, people were already going, well, it's not really real. It didn't really happen. It's all fake. Everything that comes out online is fake. Even when you put it out yourself, it was really a shock to see how many people will bend over backwards to not believe their eyes nowadays.
And you cannot stand in Kibbutz Be'eri, where children were burned live, where families were murdered, huddled over themselves, and you can still like see where it happened and see the markings on the wall. And you can't stay blind to that. You know, if you can, you're really messed up to begin with. Like your soul is just not salvageable.
Sometimes I feel that way with the people I talk to online who send us messages with just conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. It's just, there's some people you can't get through to, and it'd be very interesting. And I know that March of Living actually does a non-Jewish trip, or whatever, there was a different term or name for it, which is interesting because I think some people, if they actually went to these kibbutzim who didn't believe, who knows, maybe you could actually somehow get some information into their heads that go, okay, maybe I was wrong about what I'm saying. But it's so easy, these keyboard warriors who are a million miles away, and they're able to nitpick little photos and say what they're not seeing and then assume a bunch of stuff, and then they can just dismiss the entire thing because it's so easy from behind their keyboard. And it's a shame because these are real people's lives that are being affected, and yet they discredit them, disqualify them. It's a very big shame.
And it's still going on. It's still going on. Like, we still have over 100 hostages. There's still a war being fought. And when you go to these beautiful oases of kibbutzim along the Gaza envelope, they're evacuated. It's like ghost town. And these people are still living as refugees in their own country in the most really challenging state of their life. I joke about it with a friend of mine from Kfar Aza who said, I counted over the last 2 months that I spent more time in an elevator in the last 2 months living as a refugee in Herzliya than I ever did in my life, because the kibbutz life is it's just so free and open and
no elevators.
And connected to
you just step out to your
she never visited buildings before. And that's like a small, cute anecdote, but really, you go to visit. I think for me personally, what's the hardest experience about going down south is actually going down south, but then seeing the refugees where they are now. And when you go to a hotel, as beautiful as it is, in Tel Aviv, beachfront, Royal Beach Hotel, I went to visit with refugees from Nativ HaSara in Kiryat Shmona. And as beautiful as the hotel is in great location, it's still a family of 4 or 5 people living in a tiny one hotel room or 2 hotel rooms for 2 months. They fled with nothing but what's on their back. They don't have a regular routine for their children. They're far away from the work. They don't have work. They're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with loss, with mourning. And they're living, they can't do their own laundry. They can't cook their own food. They can't make their own arrangements. And these are mostly kibbutzes, not only. And kibbutz, like the kibbutz mentality is all about creating and doing and giving to the general society and pioneering. And here they are as like refugees with handouts, with their hand open to the will of a government that totally lost their trust. So it's so sad. Like, it's really sad.
Wow.
And we don't know how long that will last. Like, there's no end in sight when they'll be able to return. And if they want to return.
That's
if
true.
They're not too traumatized, they're not too scared. The ones of the South, they're too traumatized. And the ones from the North, the lucky ones, started to be hosted by other kibbutzes, but that creates secondary trauma on the hosting kibbutz. Mm-hmm. When the kids show up to the dining room and they start talking about the horrific acts that happened to them, and then the other children who were not involved in October 7th start hearing that, and they have that fear of trauma. And then all the 60,000 people who were evacuated from the northern border, from Kiryat Shmona and Shlomi and other parts along the border with Lebanon, where the threat is still very much alive, larger than Hezbollah in its capacity, in its weaponry capacity. And they won't go back home, even if the army would let them, because they're afraid of October 7th on crack.
From the north.
Them. So I don't know. There's no end in sight.
It's a very scary thought. And to think about when this can end, how this is going to end, it doesn't seem to be going in a good direction with the increase to more and more threats and the upping the ante constantly by different groups. It's a very scary thought. And I know that in the end, Israel will always prevail because we have to. We have nowhere else to go. This is our home. This is our ancient homeland. But at what cost? The amount of people that are hurt or psychologically hurt to keep this country alive. It's a shame that the world doesn't see it. And hopefully this interview with you will help some people understand not necessarily the physical war issue, but the side effects of a society that's constantly under threat, that never has any peace and safety. And, you can't get on a bus, you can't go to a restaurant, you can't live in your home. It's a very scary thing. And I think the world needs to wake up and realize that the Jewish people, and not even just the Jewish people, the Israeli people, which is made up of everybody, deserve peace and a home that they can call safe.
And, we as the Jewish people don't feel that we deserve. We don't feel that we should be granted anything. The world owes us anything, because we know the world won't show up, but we've built it once with our own two hands. We can depend only on ourselves. We've built it once in 1948, coming out of the ashes. And October 8th is coming out of the ashes again, and we will rebuild Israel, point two. And it will be done by Zionists, point two, pioneers, Zionists, point two, who are doing podcasts and investing in the Israeli economy. And those are the people who are going to show up, and their allies. And I will say this, that if you didn't show up for us now, you will have no room at the table when we do rebuild this country. And if you did show up for us now, you are invested in this startup idea called Israel, a Western civilization rooted in ancient history and its returning of a people to their homeland after thousands of years. And doing so with always their eyes looking forward and hope for bringing a better future, not only for our people, but for the rest of the world, because that's what Israel stands for. And we will rebuild that.
It's amazing.
And we'll do it better.
That's amazing. I think, honestly, I couldn't think of a better way to end this podcast than that amazing word of hope and pride and success. And may Israel be granted peace in the near future, may you guys all be at peace and not have any war or any conflict. May all of the people come home who are in Gaza, warriors and hostages, and hopefully this will all be over sooner than later for all of you. And I want to thank you honestly for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Praying for all the hostages to return home. Thank you very much.
This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.